What happens when a liberal professor tries to publicly humiliate a student she doesn't like, only to realize she just challenged a genius, and not just any genius, a certified 170 IQ prodigy, Barron Trump? Trust me, by the end of this story, your jaw will be on the floor. Like and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales like this, and let me take you deep into what happened on that fateful day. It was March 23, 2025, a morning draped in the soft gray light of early spring, when the air inside one of America's most prestigious universities carried a whisper of unease. Dr. Linda Markham's advanced calculus class wasn't just a room. It was a proving ground, a place where brilliant minds collided with her towering intellect and, increasingly, her unapologetic political fervor. The lecture hall itself felt alive that day, its high ceilings and polished wooden desks humming with a quiet anticipation as students trickled in, their backpacks rustling, their voices hushed. The whiteboard, usually a chaotic tapestry of equations and proofs, stood starkly bare except for a single ominous sentence scrawled in bold red marker. Today's topic: redefining academic priorities. The back row, almost swallowed by the shadows, sat Barron Trump, a young man whose presence was as striking as it was understated. At over 6 feet tall, his frame was clad in a meticulously tailored black suit, his blonde hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the room. He was a mystery to his classmates, a figure who spoke little but observed everything. They knew his name, of course. How could they not? But they didn't know the mind behind it. A mind so sharp it could cut through steel. That morning, as the clock ticked toward 9 a.m., no one could have predicted that this quiet giant was about to step into a storm that would leave the university and the world reeling. Dr. Markham strode to the front of the room with a purpose that bordered on aggression, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like the ticking of a bomb. Her graying hair was pulled into a tight bun, her glasses perched low on her nose, and her lips pressed into a thin line that hinted at barely contained disdain. "Mathematics," she began, her voice ringing out with the authority of someone who'd spent decades mastering her craft, "is a tool, a brilliant one, but it's not enough anymore." The room stilled, a collective breath held as she pivoted away from the expected lecture on integrals or differential equations. "In today's world," she continued, her tone sharpening, "we must balance it with the pressing needs of social justice." A few students exchanged uneasy glances. Others scribbled notes, unsure where this was going. Barron, seated alone in the back, shifted slightly in his chair, his long fingers resting on the desk. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his hand rose into beer. The air, a gesture so calm it felt like a ripple in a stormy sea. Dr. Markham's eyes flicked toward him, narrowing for a fraction of a second, but she pressed on, undeterred. Clicking a remote, she unveiled a PowerPoint slide that had nothing to do with calculus. Stark bar graphs and pie charts detailing gender and racial disparities in STEM fields. "Some of you," she said, her gaze drifting deliberately toward the back of the room, "might need to reckon with the fact that your seat here isn't a product of merit. It's a gift of privilege." The words landed like a slap, and the tension in the room thickened, a palpable weight pressing down on every chest. Barron's hand remained raised, steady as a metronome, a silent challenge she couldn't ignore forever. She didn't stop there. Dr. Markham's lecture spiraled deeper into ideology, each sentence a brick in the wall she was building between herself and her students. "Family wealth, connections, elite prep schools," she said, clicking to another slide, a photo of a gilded private academy, its manicured lawns screaming exclusivity. "These are the real currencies of education, often disguised as talent." The implication hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable, aimed like an arrow at the young man in the black suit. A few students turned, their eyes darting to Barron, expecting a flinch, a flush of shame, a crack in his composure. But there was none. His expression remained serene, almost contemplative, as if he were solving an equation in his head rather than absorbing a public dressing down. Whispers snaked through the rows, some in awe, some in discomfort. A girl in the third row, her notebook still blank, leaned toward her friend and muttered, "She's talking about him." Another student, a lanky boy with glasses, nodded faintly, his pencil tapping nervously against his desk. Barron's hand stayed up, a lighthouse in the fog of her rhetoric, and the longer it lingered, the more it seemed to unnerve her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of pointed jabs, Dr. Markham wheeled around, her patience snapping like a brittle twig. "Yes, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice laced with irritation and a trace of mockery. "Do you have something to contribute to our discussion about privilege and education?" The room went deathly quiet, every eye locked on the back row, every heart pounding with the certainty that something monumental was about to unfold. Barron lowered his hand slowly, deliberately, and rose to his feet. At his full height, he seemed to fill the space, not with arrogance, but with a quiet gravity that drew every gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was measured, respectful, yet firm, a velvet glove over an iron fist. "Dr. Markham," he began, "calculus isn't just a subject, it's a foundation. It underpins science, engineering, medicine, everything that moves the world forward. We chose this class, this advanced class, to dive into that, not to debate social theories." A ripple of agreement stirred the room, heads nodded, tentative but growing bolder. "If we water it down," he added, his eyes meeting hers without a trace of defiance, only clarity, "we're not just cheating ourselves, we're cheating everyone, no matter their background." The words were simple, logical, but they carried a weight that made the air hum. Dr. Markham's smirk twitched, her confidence teetering as she sensed the shift in the room. "Oh, Mr. Trump," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension, "perhaps you, of all people, could benefit from a lesson in how privilege shapes opportunity. Not everyone had your private tutors, your golden ticket." The jab was a blade meant to cut deep, to provoke. Students braced themselves, waiting for anger, for a stumble. But Barron didn't falter. He smiled, a gentle, almost disarming curve of his lips that threw her off balance. "You're right, Professor," he said, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "I've been fortunate. That's exactly why I believe in holding the line. High standards don't favor privilege, they level it. They give everyone a shot at something real." Her face flushed, a storm brewing behind her eyes. She hadn't expected this. Reason instead of rage, humility instead of hubris. "You think you know better than me?" she snapped, her voice rising, her control slipping. "Prove it." And with that, she marched to the whiteboard, her marker slashing across it like a sword, birthing a mathematical beast that made the room gasp. The equation she wrote wasn't just complex, it was a nightmare, a sprawling, multivariable monstrosity tangled with integrals, series expansions, and partial derivatives. It stretched across the board, a labyrinth of symbols that seemed to mock the very idea of solution. Even the front-row prodigies, the ones who lived for this stuff, paled as they traced its contours. "Since you're so passionate about standards," Dr. Markham said, turning with a smirk that oozed triumph, "why don't you solve this? Unless you'd rather discuss your privileged background instead?" The challenge was a trap, a public guillotine she'd crafted with care. She'd chosen this problem deliberately, far beyond the syllabus, a graduate-level riddle that demanded techniques she hadn't taught, knowledge she assumed he couldn't possibly possess. A murmur ran through the class. "That's insane," someone whispered. "No undergrad could touch that," another muttered. Dr. Markham crossed her arms, certain she'd won, her victory a foregone conclusion. But Barron didn't hesitate. He stood, his movements fluid and unhurried, and walked to the front of the room as if summoned to a casual chat rather than a crucible. Her smirk widened as he took the marker, but something in his eyes, calm, focused, almost curious, made her certainty flicker, just for a moment. He studied the equation, his head tilting slightly, as if greeting an old friend. Then he turned to the class, his voice cutting through the tension like a clear bell. "This has multiple paths," he said. The standard method's a slog. 2 boards, minimum. Or there's a cleaner way, something I picked up from Leibniz's original papers. In German, because the translations lose his flair. Which do you want? Dr. Markham's jaw dropped, her composure fracturing. You've read Leibniz? In German, she stammered, disbelief cracking her voice. The elegance is in the original, he replied simply, then turned back to the board. The room held its breath, sensing the tide turning, and what came next would shatter every expectation. Barron's hand moved across the whiteboard with a grace that bordered on hypnotic, each stroke deliberate, each symbol placed with surgical precision. He didn't just solve the problem. He narrated it, his voice a steady thread weaving through the chaos. Here, he said, circling a knot of integrals, Euler's 1755 insight cuts through the noise, turns a mess into something clean. Students leaned forward, their notebooks forgotten, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and comprehension. Phones slipped out, cameras rolling, capturing every moment of this quiet revolution. Even those who'd barely scraped by in calculus found themselves nodding, drawn in by his clarity, his patience. Dr. Markham stood frozen, her arms still crossed but her smirk gone, replaced by a dawning realization she couldn't name. Between steps, Barron paused, glancing back at the class. You following? He asked, and a few tentative hands shot up, then more, a forest of agreement. He smiled faintly and pressed on, unraveling the equation's secrets with an ease that felt almost otherworldly. Halfway through he stopped, marker poised, and turned to Dr. Markham. We've got a fork here, he said. The traditional grind takes time, or Leibniz's shortcut sings. Your call, Professor. The question wasn't just mathematical. It was a mirror, reflecting her own challenge back at her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She was a deer. In headlights, her trap sprung on herself. Then, from the middle of the room, a soft voice broke the silence. Can we see both? It was Sarah Chen, a scholarship student with dark circles under her eyes from late-night study sessions. Her hand trembling as she raised it. This is actually making sense, she added, almost to herself. Barron's grin widened, warm and genuine. Both it is, he said, and dove back in, the suspense coiling tighter as Dr. Markham's world began to crumble. The room was a powder keg, every scratch of the marker amplifying the tension, when the door slammed open with a force that made everyone jump. Dean Richardson, a broad-shouldered man with a reputation as Dr. Markham's ideological bulldog, strode in, his face flushed with urgency. Linda, he barked. Emergency faculty meeting. Curriculum changes now. It was her lifeline, a chance to escape the unraveling disaster. She seized it, her voice clipped. We'll finish. This another time, she said, brushing past Barron toward the door. But he didn't let her go so easily. Professor, he called, his tone polite but edged with steel. You challenged me in front of everyone. Walking away now. What does that teach us about integrity? The dean stopped mid-step, his head whipping around. The class erupted, in murmurs, a tide of shock and admiration swelling. Phones tilted higher, red lights blinking. Young man, the dean growled, advancing a step. Are you suggesting? I'm stating, Barron cut in, his voice unwavering. She questioned my merit, my right to be here. I'm answering. The only question is, will she stand by her own test? Dr. Markham froze, caught between her ally and the eyes of 50 students, her authority dangling by a thread. The dean's jaw tightened, his fists clenching as if ready to shut this down by force. Then Barron did something no one saw coming. He picked up the marker from where it had rolled and held it out to her. Or maybe you'd rather solve it first, he said, his smile faint but piercing. You said it yourself. Family doesn't matter, knowledge does. Show us. The silence was deafening, a vacuum sucking the air from the room. Dr. Markham stared at the marker, her hand twitching as she reached for it, then pulled back. The equation loomed behind her, a Goliath she'd summoned but couldn't slay. Her eyes met Barron's, and for the first time she saw not a student but a mirror, and the reflection terrified her. "I can't," she whispered, the words slipping out like a confession torn from her soul. The marker fell again, clattering against the floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Students gasped, a collective intake of breath that shook the room. Dr. Markham's shoulders slumped, her glasses fogging slightly as tears welled in her eyes. "I can't do it," she repeated, louder, her voice breaking. "I thought I was proving a point, but I was wrong." The admission hung there, raw and jagged, a wound laid bare. Barron didn't gloat, didn't revel in her defeat. He stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Let's do it together," he offered, bending to retrieve the marker and holding it out again. Collaboration beats conflict every time. Her pride reared up, a dying beast thrashing in its cage, but the fight was bleeding out of her. She shook her head, a tear spilling down her cheek. "No," she said, then straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I've been so consumed with tearing down what I saw as privilege that I forgot what this room is for, learning, not preaching. You didn't just solve that equation, Barron. You showed me what I've lost." Before the dean could turn this into a bureaucratic salvage, Operation Chaos exploded beyond the door. A roar of voices swelled in the hallway, dozens, then hundreds of students, drawn by the viral clips flooding X in real time. They pressed against the glass, holding signs scrawled on torn notebook pages. "Teach math, not politics. Merit over bias." The situation was a heartbeat from spiraling into a riot, until Barron moved. He walked to the door, his presence a calm amid the storm, and raised a hand. "If you're here to learn," he called, his voice cutting through the din like a blade, "come in. There's room." They flooded the lecture hall, a tide of eager faces, and he turned back to the board, marker in hand. "Who wants to see calculus change the world?" he asked, and what happened next would echo far beyond those walls. The hour that followed was electric, a symphony of minds coming alive. Barron didn't just finish the problem. He turned it into a story, weaving practical applications into every step. How calculus builds bridges, predicts storms, saves lives. Students who'd never spoken asked questions, their voices trembling with excitement. Dr. Markham watched from the side, silent, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding together the pieces of who she'd been. The dean lingered, his bluster deflated, scribbling notes as if witnessing a miracle he couldn't quite grasp. Word spread like wildfire across campus, and in the weeks that followed, the transformation was seismic. Dr. Markham returned to her roots, her lectures once again, ablaze with the pure, unfiltered beauty of mathematics. Barron, true to his word, began hosting study sessions in the library, late-night gatherings where equations danced on whiteboards and struggling students found their footing. Attendance in the class tripled, not for drama, but for the promise of something real, a space where merit reigned, where questions were king, and where learning transcended the petty divides of politics. One evening, as Barron guided Sarah Chen through a derivative that had haunted her for weeks, Dr. Markham approached, her steps tentative. "You could have destroyed me that day," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "You had every right to. Instead, you saved me. Saved this class." She paused, then added, "Your father would be proud." Barron looked up, his eyes steady, wise beyond his years. "It was never about destruction, Professor," he said. "It was about building something better, for all of us." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through, the first real one anyone had seen from her in years. Today, that classroom stands as a beacon, a legend whispered in dorms and dining halls. It's not just about the math, though the math is breathtaking. It's about what happened when one young man stood up, not with anger, but with grace, not to win, but to teach. Dr. Markham and Barron became an unlikely team, their partnership, a bridge between theory and practice, between past mistakes and future promise. Students who once cowered before integrals now tackle them with confidence, their voices loud, their minds awake. The culture shifted, not just in that room, but across the department, then the university, a ripple of change born from a single, stunning moment. Barron still sits in the back, still helps after hours, still believes the greatest privilege isn't wealth or name. It's the chance to learn, to grow, to lift others up. Dr. Markham, humbled and renewed, found her calling again, her lectures, a love letter to the subject she'd nearly abandoned. And the story. It's not over. It's a living thing, growing with every student who walks through that door, every mind it touches. If this tale gripped you, moved you, made your heart race, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? What hit you hardest? Because this isn't just a story, it's a spark. See you in the next one, where the truth keeps burning bright.